Welcome back from the work from home setter. Now, if things look a little bit different to you, that's because we moved about 5 hours away. It has been a crazy whirlwind of the last few weeks, and I have a lot to share with you, and I look forward to sitting down and making an entire video about that. But today we are going to be making hearty meals because when you move, you pack up a lot of your stuff, you get really busy, and you tend to eat out a lot. And we are sick of eating fast food, and we just need some hearty meals in our bellies. So we're going to go ahead and get started with that today. And we're going to make a really hearty soup kind of stew for the first meal here. Now you saw me start to get some ground sausage. It's actually ground venison sausage that my aunt gave to me from their deer that they got a few weeks ago. I'm getting that fried up in a cast iron pot. A Dutch oven or any kind of sturdy pot would really do well here. And you really want to kind of get it nice and crispy. That's where the really good flavor is going to come from. Chop up one potato, put that to the side, and then we are going to chop up a sweet potato as well. Now, you could obviously sub these for one or two potatoes or two sweet potatoes if you only have one on hand or you don't want to go grab another thing from the store. Really, this is a very versatile thing. That's what I love about soups. You can really switch it up to what you have on hand. But we're going to cube these into small pieces. You always want to make sure when you're putting something in a soup or stew that you make them all very consistent sizes so that they cook evenly and the mouth feel and texture when you eat it is consistent. Now we're going to chop up this onion nice and small. I did about a half of a pretty large onion. I love an onion flavor, so, put more or less depending on how you like it. Now, once we finish chopping that up, we're going to do about 3 carrots. Now, these are organic carrots, so typically when I get organic carrots, I don't care that much about peeling them. I'm not as concerned about a lot of the chemicals and stuff that is on the outside. And a lot of times when we peel vegetables, that's where actually the nutrition lies. So as long as it's clean, that's truly what matters. And then you're also just not wasting as much of your veggies. So I chop this up again into small pieces. I usually like to chop it in half lengthwise and then maybe another 2 or 3 times with the other side. Now, once you're done chopping all of that, give your meat another stir as it's cooking. Once it's pretty much almost done cooking, then you can add some of your seasonings to the meat. Now, when I'm doing a soup or stew, I always like to make sure that I season the meat before I put in any other components, because if your meat is unflavored, it's really going to do a detriment to the rest of your soup. So I put some salt, pepper, some garlic powder in here, a touch of paprika, and a little bit of thyme, mostly because that's just like what I had on hand. And you can see my son is playing with the lights here. He is just kind of getting to the height where he can start to play with a lot of that. So that's something that we are just enjoying in this stage of toddlerhood. But I just put all of those in there. You could really flavor it however you want. And I would say that this venison sausage had definitely a bit of a peppier taste and flake seasoning to it. I'm not exactly sure what they put in there. But just note that if you want a similar taste to what I made, I would definitely add a good amount of pepper in there, which I thought really added a lot to the taste there. So here I am negotiating with my toddler, which, I think honestly should probably be like a class in college. I mean, negotiation with a toddler, if you can negotiate with them, you could probably negotiate with anybody. So I'm just adding in everything into the soup pot here, and I'm letting everything kind of just fry in there for a little bit. I always like to get a little bit of color on my veggies as I cook them for any kind of soup or stew. So I have a little bit of wild rice. If you don't have wild rice, you could also use just regular rice or just add in more potatoes or sweet potatoes. Really, again, this is pretty versatile. I put in a little bit of thyme into the soup, which I thought added a really nice kind of just wintry flavor. Kind of reminds me a bit of Thanksgiving, with that nice kind of just warm flavor. Then I put an entire stick of butter and about equal parts flour to make somewhat of a roux. Now, the grease from the sausage also helped kind of make that roux as well. So you could probably put a little bit less butter if you wanted. Then you can see it kind of thickening up here. I added more water, probably in all close to maybe 6 to 8 cups. I wanted enough to make sure that I could cook the vegetables, but then also the wild rice when I added it. Now, if I were to do this again, I would probably cook the wild rice separately and then add it into the soup. I always try to be clever and reduce the amount of cooking pots that I do, but sometimes it doesn't always work out quite right. And with the wild rice, I think it would have just cooked a little bit better had it been done separately, but it still worked out okay. It just took a little bit longer than I would have hoped. With all the other components in there. So if you're feeling lazy and you don't mind it taking a little bit longer, you could throw the wild rice in there. Otherwise, just cook it separately. Now I added a little bit of heavy cream in there to make it a little bit more of a creamy soup. I thought about adding Parmesan in here, but then I opted not to, but I honestly think that would also be a really great feature on top. My husband loved this and he talked about it for a few days, and when I know he brings it up multiple times, that's when I know it's a real winner because he doesn't always mention food a ton. So I know that was definitely something to make again. Now, the next thing we're going to make is some pulled beef. Now, I got the stew meat from Costco, and usually I get their chuck roast, but I don't know if I've just not seen it or this is new, but they've started to carry stew meat, which honestly, for what I use it for, works just the same because I cook it down usually low and slow or on my Instapot. And we're going to make almost kind of I don't want to say barilla, but it's going to be kind of reminiscent of that, using a lot of the chipotle pepper and chilies and adobo, and just kind of letting that marinate in the beef. So it's not exactly like a consomme, but it's kind of borrowing some of those practices. I'm putting some paprika and some garlic in there, salt and pepper, of course, and I'm going to cook that low and slow for about 3 hours. So I added water just until it about covered it, and I put this in frozen, so I gave it a little bit of time to thaw out before I checked to see if the meat was entirely covered. And once it thawed, there was a perfect amount of water so that it was covered and it could cook slow and slow. So after it started to kind of simmer, I popped the heat down for about 3 hours, and really just gotta check it every hour or so and see if your meat is starting to become tender. And here you can see it is starting to become tender, and I let it go for a little bit longer, and then I started to pick it apart in a fork. Now, this is I'm cutting up some sweet potatoes. I'm going to make a sweet potato taco type of thing. I don't know. This was something I had in my head, a little bit of a brainchild that I'm working on an exact recipe, and something that I think would be the perfect rendition of it, but it was still a really good meal. Now I'm chopping these up pretty small because I want to really get them crispy for the taco. And so I'm throwing some olive oil in there, and I'm going to probably fry it for about 10 minutes or so, and some salt and pepper, some paprika, and some garlic as well, and just kind of get it nice and fried up. Next, I'm going to get working on my tortilla dough, and I still had not found where my rolling pin was at this point. Now, in various parts of this video, my kitchen is probably going to be a disaster, by the way, so please just be gracious about that because we are still unpacking and trying to find everything. And I have been a little bit out of the game of tortilla making too, and this was not my best dough. So combine that with not the best dough and not the best roller. It made for interesting tortillas, but they were still pretty delicious. Now, this is what the meat turned out when I finally took it off the burner. You can see how tender it is. It just falls apart with a fork, which is just amazing and really makes it so good. And I cooked up those tortillas, put the sweet potatoes, meat, and a little bit of cheese on there, and they were pretty darn good. Next time I'd probably put some salsa or some sort of crema on top, but definitely it is a winner in my book, and I will continue to try to improve these tacos and really just make them as best as they can be, because I know I'm onto something with them. Now, next, I'm going to use up the second venison sausage that my aunt gave me. I had put them both in the fridge, not thinking about it, and I knew I needed to use both of them up before they went bad. And plus, my husband was still talking about the stew I made earlier in the week, so he was happy that I was going to make something else with them. So I decided to try my hand at gnocchi again. Now, if you watched my budget video, which I'll link below, that I did probably about a month or two ago, you know that I tried my hand at gnocchi. I did not put enough flour in it. However, they still turned out really great. But this time I totally nailed it. And my husband agreed that I definitely am figuring out gnocchi. That's just one thing about cooking, is sometimes you just have to try it and learn by trial and error. Now here you can see me trying to effectively crack an egg and keep with one hand and keep the yolk in, but I was so close, but it slipped out. So, you really learn your skills with holding a baby in one hand and trying to cook. So I just scooped it out of this little vessel and threw the egg yolk in there. So with gnocchi, you just want an egg yolk ideally, and then adding a little bit of flour in there as well. And most gnocchi recipes, you're not going to see a specific amount of flour, because it's really going to depend on the size of your potato and just like how much it's absorbing it. And it's really just something that you kind of need to work with and figure out like what is the right consistency. And my kind of telltale sign is like if it's the right consistency is when I start to roll it out, like does it start to break apart? And if it does, then that tells me that it's not quite ready. And that was my mistake that I made last time, is like my intuition said that it wasn't ready when I was rolling it out, but I felt like I had added so much flour at that point that I thought, well, it couldn't possibly need any more. But truly trust your gut with this, and you'll see here. I'm trying to test it out by rolling it out, and you can see it's like starting to break apart on me. And I'm like, I totally need more flour here. So I added a little bit more, and then I rolled it out, and it was much better consistency. So just trust your gut. It should really roll out. It's not going to be quite a dough, but it should be staying together. And it shouldn't really break apart when you're starting to cut it. It shouldn't be super potatoey. So I just rolled this out here, and then I, of course, also don't know where my bench scraper is at this point. So this is like just, this is me selling you on not needing a bunch of crazy tools in the kitchen, honestly. And, I've already done a video on that. If you've followed me for a while, a lot of my tools I have had for years and years and years, and I am not one to get crazy new gadgets. So this spatula worked perfect to cut this gnocchi up. Again, you guys don't need crazy tools to be making food from scratch, I promise you. So once I was done making the gnocchi, I cut up some more carrots, and again, just make those into small bite-sized pieces. That was going into the soup, and just kind of to add a little bit more heartiness to the soup, a little bit of extra flavor as well. And also, if you notice, both in this soup and the other soup, I did not use any broth. I used the flavoring from the meats and the veggies and a little bit of water, and I'm telling you, these soups and stews were super flavorful. I honestly just didn't have broth on hand. Otherwise, I probably would have added it, but it's really important to know that you don't always need it, especially when you're trying to save money at the store. A lot of things you can get your flavor just from the foods that you are cooking. You don't always need that extra flavoring from a broth or whatever have you. You can really be resourceful with the foods that you have. So at this point, I'm just adding in some water to the soup. I've cooked the sausage up, and I'm just letting it come to a boil. And in the meantime, I am unloading some plates. You can see in the background, we have really started to bring a lot of stuff inside from our garage to start unpacking. Now that it is boiling, I am adding in the gnocchi. You want to have your soup boiling. When you add that in, you're going to cook it for about like 2 or so minutes. Once you start to see them float to the top and they look much firmer. Then you know that your gnocchi is ready and you can cut the heat. And then after that, you can add in a good amount of cream. I probably put about maybe a cup of heavy cream. I really wanted this to be a nice and creamy soup. And I added one last touch there. I added some chopped up arugula. I love arugula in a soup much more than spinach or kale. If you haven't tried it, I highly recommend. It adds a really nice bite to it. And honestly, I just think that it cooks up much better. And if you aren't chopping up any of your greens in your soups, or anytime you cook with greens, highly recommend it. It makes it much more palatable. It doesn't get kind of like stringy or weird. I hope that this was helpful. I make videos like this every week, and if you found this helpful, please share with your friends, subscribe, and let me know what your favorite hearty winter soup is below, because sharing is caring, and I hope to see you guys soon.